If that happens,
and you know what, though?
if that has happened in the sport here, in not just in one state but in multiple states, why is it? It's just it goes further into what you're going through. Is like, do you want answers? Why? Why is this still happening? And go ahead.
Sorry, with the Mark Ratner thing, I think it's simple. And again, I told you, like, Mark Ratner was the guy that would yank people, and he would follow the rules to a T because he was a regulator. So, everybody says that UFC's, goes in and bends rules here and there. When it comes to safety and head trauma, I think that this is not a case of him deciding that they're coming back. I think it's WME. And, it's a totally different organization now that WME is pulling the strings. And there's an inside little thing that, may or may not have influenced this deal at all about coming into Edmonton. But late last year, they announced that this brand new arena that they built in Edmonton had a deal with one of WME's major clients. So it was right in the newspaper that it was WME IMG client. It was like a bull riding circuit that they're bringing to this arena. So, maybe it was part of the deal where it was like, if we get this deal, maybe we'll bring the UFC. You never know what happens in these deals. So if it was, contingent on the fact that they were coming with these two different events, one doesn't happen, well, guess what? That kind of screws you for future events. So, you talk about how they've done the right things and pulled certain events. I think one of the biggest kind of things that really disgusted me about the UFC was the way that, do you remember a few years ago, when they hired Matt Hughes and they hired Chuck Liddell for those positions, within the company.
Here we go. Me and you are on the same boat here. Keep going.
Yeah. What were those
put
positions?
them in this position.
What were they?
Well, they were basically, to me, and I'm a PR guy by study. I went to school and I'm an honors PR grad. To me, it looked like they were making fake union reps. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, these are the guys you go to if you need something. So in my eyes, that's the way that it looked. So these were the guys that, you look at even like, these associations and groups that are started. These were the guys that fighters were supposed to be able to come to with their problems. Well, you say that, and you pay these guys, and they're telling, we're here for the fighters, and we're going to help the fighters. And you've got Chuck Liddell, who everybody knows has shown symptoms of CTE and concussions. He's out there doing interviews, telling everyone that you need to be exciting like I was and stand and bang more because nobody wants to see you rolling around on the ground. So he's a poster child for CTE, telling other fighters that they need to get CTE too if they want to be in the good books of Dana and the UFC. It's just such a, everybody talks about all this, it's contrary to what they're saying and what they're doing. There are two different sides of everything. And to me, it just looks like the bottom line, even the way that they're treating Woodley and they're treating like some of these other fighters that, they call boring. Dana just wants to see people fight. He wants to see them box, basically, and just, throw haymakers at each other and beat each other up. That's great, but I think the sport has evolved enough now where we're not that lowbrow where every fight has to be rock'em sock'em robots. Like you go back and actually look at Griffin versus Bonner, look at the technical side of that fight. Sure, it may excite fans. It may be fun to watch. That's not the kind of fight that I think would attract most mainstream, people to consider this a mainstream sport. I think it's that kind of thing that's kind of holding us back, where it has to be bloody and it has to be, I get in arguments all the time with people that just say, this is a boring fight, that's a boring fight, this is a boring fighter, that's a boring fighter. Well, the name of the game was, it was winning, right? Back in the day when it first started, It was winning. And when Royce Gracie, first came out and beat everybody.
I'll point out a fight right now. Right now that fans unanimously was saying, "Oh, this is a boring fight that no one liked," and it was extremely technical. Was Joshua Mann and the Barn Cat. It was his return from Bellator back to the UFC, and he was utterly dominant on the grappling side of things to the point where Josh couldn't throw any punches. Every time he would reverse out of position. You would see Tandem countering and get back into a dominant grappling position. Didn't have a whole lot of punches, but it was just so technically sound. But at least in my opinion, because when I started following combat sports was way back in the 80s, Mike Tyson boxing and that whole era. I didn't really get into MMA until seeing the first season of The Ultimate Fighter on Spike. But I actually, when it comes to mixed martial arts, I love the grappling aspect of it because listen, we all can be taught how to throw a punch, to throw an elbow, to throw a knee, to throw a kick. We all can be taught can pick that up fairly easily. But being an elite grappler, wrestler, that takes years and years and years and years and years of drilling, practice, escapes, the whole nine. It for me, that it does it for me. I don't, do I love a knockout? Anyone who has a beating heart and blood running through their veins loves watching combat sports in that aspect. But
I agree. I agree.
To me, man, it's just one of those things. I don't really dig when people are like, "Oh, that guy's a born fighter." And people are like, you just mentioned Tyron Woodley. People are down on this guy. Did when he came over from Strikeforce, did he not just like polarize Josh Koscheck like no one had ever done ever?
Yes. Like, and the other problem is, and people have brought it up before, and I think it is a good point worth raising, is, the UFC fan base. Let's be honest. There are times where I go out, if I'm watching, say, at a bar with someone, or you're at an event and there's people watching there. A lot of the fans are, maybe more of the rednecky, and you know what? I hate to say that, but a lot of them, don't really follow it as much. They're kind of fair weather fans where they want to see McGregor fight. But you know what the worst part is? I think about that is the ones that kind of buy into that hype may not be the ones that are kind of overthinking things like us. And you know what? A lot of the people that people call boring or say, they don't like as fighters, and the UFC starts throwing under the bus like Jake Shields and John Fitch, it doesn't matter. These guys win. It doesn't matter how they win. This is not really sports entertainment like you're trying to make it out to be. This is not the WWE. So because you're giving, Paige Van Zandt a push, and you're giving, all these different fighters that, Sage Northcutt a push. Sage is not as good as John Fitch, and Sage is not as good as the Barn. You know what I mean? Like, he's not at that level yet where he's at, a well-rounded fighter as good as these guys. And the problem is it goes back to society. They want, you've got racism, you've got, maybe some sexism, you've got, which is why the women's divisions haven't gotten the push over the years until, Ronda and all these different, there's a lot of fighters who I don't think are treated fairly because of how unmarketable they are by the UFC, even though if they are the best fighters. And that's, it's a problem when you see the way that they've marketed. Nick Diaz had a perfect point when he said he's always the monster on the poster. He's always the Bela Lugosi that's looming over, the monster poster, looking at George St. Pierre with a halo over his head. Not just George, and it's not George's fault. It's the UFC marketing department. They kind of pick and choose who they're giving the push to even before the fight, I think, in certain areas. And again, it's not the whole company, but there are certain people, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's where, like, the sports entertainment aspect of MMA is evolving to. I mean, like you said, this is a sport. It doesn't. Yep. If I know I'm going against an elite jiu-jitsu practitioner, I'm not going to be going, full throttle with my fist and hoping I get some contact. With Tyron Woodley, I could, if you watch fights, if you watch a lot of fights, you can kind of understand where he's coming from. If I go throwing my fist crazy, I'm going to lose my belt. I'm going to lose maybe these sponsors. I'm not going to lose half of these fans that hate me, but they're still fans.
And money.
And the money. It's just like with that last fight with what's her face, the champ, the featherweight champ, or the bantamweight champ. What's her name?
Cyborg.
She got sick with a
nasal
infection.
Sorry, Amanda.
Yeah, Amanda Nunes. There's a lot to lose, and Dana White, man, just throwing these fighters under the bus. I just see a lot of people migrating over to the other side eventually down the road. I mean, there's only going to be so much these guys and girls can take when they're still winning the fights, but they're getting ridiculed because they're not speaking like The Rock or Conor McGregor. There's only one Conor McGregor.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, talking about how they throw them under the bus and do all kinds of things that you're like, why would you say and do that? You're insinuating that she's, weak or didn't want to fight, or she's a chick. Like, I don't know what the point of that is when, if you look at boxing, the boxing promoters are promoting their fighters. You know, they're promoting them. They're not bad-mouthing them. Maybe the opponents that's being promoted by someone else, well, Dana's promoting them, and he's talking about his own fighters that way. And you got to wonder,
is he doing this because he's trying to be like a Vince McMahon type now, just so he can stir the pot so he can have a heel and a baby face? I mean, it kind of sounds like that's where it's going, and it's just blowing my mind how stupid that sounds.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, especially when you look at the fact that Dana started back in the sport as a manager who managers are supposed to take care of their friends or fighters or whoever they're helping out is number one. You know, and then all of a sudden now he's calling fighters pussies, and he's doing things that you're just like, what's going on here? But you know, Dana's never really been one to follow all the rules. But I think the problem is WME, I think, saw him as the bigger part of the brand than the fighters. And in a lot of ways, for years he was, and he is the biggest, probably most recognizable face in the sport. But you got to kind of look at what has he done for the UFC and what is he doing to the UFC as far as, you know, how does that make you look as a company when you've got, you know, if this was the NFL and he was an owner, he'd be fined if he was talking about his people like that, because they'd have the NFL Players Association saying, you can't do this. And that's the other issue, right? We're talking about the union issue and the fact that they are fighting against unions. Right there tells you something. The UFC are taking, I don't know if they're getting, let's say, for interest's sake, 80 to 90% of the pie when all is said and done. And the fighters are getting like 20, where it's supposed to be in boxing, it's the opposite. Boxing, the fighters are supposed to get 80% because of the Ali Act, which is in play. So, of course, they're fighting against the Ali Act. If the Ali Act gets one pen stroke and a few different, you know, inclusions where it's including MMA, he's going to lose so much money because, you know, and WME is going to lose all this money. So the fact that they are paying someone to actively lobby against fighters having more rights, more safety nets in place, and being better taken care of than they're actually doing, that just speaks volumes to me. When, you know, you see like Dana, like when he's, you know, wants to do something nice for his kids at Christmas, he has snow shipped in so they can have snow to play in. And, you know, he bought another mansion, they said, and had it torn down so he'd have more property. And he goes in and makes these bets that are 3 to 4 times as much as some of these guys' purses that they'll ever make on one hand of blackjack. And, you know, you see that, and, you know, you talk to the fighters. The fighters are kind of in this fear mode where they don't really want to say much about it, because if they do, they're afraid that there's going to be repercussions. And we've seen it before, I think. You know, maybe not on the table, like this is why we're not giving you fights. But, you know, if you're part of the MMAFA and you're talking a lot about all the mistreatment by the UFC and you're still under UFC contract, you're playing, you know, a game of Russian roulette with your career, basically. And, you know, that's the hard part, is that everybody loves to watch the sport, but without these fighters, there is no sport. And I think that, you know, there's always going to be somebody that's going to do it cheaper, you know, like anything, right? But it's you get what you pay for. The upper echelon fighters that are really, you know, the entertaining ones that are putting butts in the seats, you know, the problem is I think the UFC, well, here's something I'll give to you. The UFC is part of the problem of this wind tunnel where they're kind of pushing what the needle movers are, and they're using Google Analytics, they're using their own search term, you know, everything. They're doing it, you know, methodically to figure out who needs to get an extra push. Well, I've worked at outlets before where they've told me, and you know, it's such a niche market now when you look at MMA media. They've told me that there's no place basically for investigative journalism on any of these mainstream sites because nobody wants to click, you know, the long reads that go into all the dirty secrets of the sport. They don't want to see how the donuts are made. They just want to see the donuts, and they want to see that they're as fancy as possible. So they don't care about those kinds of stories. So the problem
they want it to be more like TMZ.
Exactly, and that's the problem. That's why I walked away from Yahoo Sports. They wanted me. They basically, and I won't say they gave me a list, but it was one of those like where I would pitch all day, story, and the only ones they would ever bite on were certain ones. And then it was known to me that, yes, GSP, always GSP, Ronda Rousey, Paige Van Zandt. So here's the problem. Is this what's causing them to be needle movers? Is it really that they're moving the needle? Or is it because we're feeding into this vortex and throwing more, you know, we're just throwing more pieces of furniture into this hurricane and hoping that it's just going to change, and it's not, because we're feeding that problem. We're giving these people. To me, I've always been a proponent of knowing, well, this is newsworthy. This is newsworthy because it needs to be told. Well, newsworthy, you won't see a lot of these mainstream sites going into these dirty little stories like the Tim Hegg story is basically fizzled everywhere but on my website. The Ali Abdelaziz story, which was, something that I'm surprised that it got as ignored as it did. People just didn't want to talk about it, and there's various reasons why. You
know why they don't want to talk about it, Mike. Come on, we both know why no one wants to talk about it. He just has so many fighters under his thumb that if you say something, you get banned and you get flopped.
Well,
and then you're no longer if you're a journalist or a media member, then you're no longer able to talk to any of those clients. That's
and it screws
your
bottom line.
It's just one of those things. And I know personally, and the funny thing is, I've never actually personally said anything. It was just from conversations me and Mike had back and forth that I wound up getting funneled in, and was blocked on other fighters' accounts. But mysteriously, Ali still, I'm not blocked by his accounts. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Funny story. I had a colleague reach out to me the other day that another manager that's not at all affiliated with Ali, other than they're good friends and they trade off favors, has told him that he couldn't have an interview with a certain fighter because of things that he'd tweeted about Ali. And that he went on to tell him, we're very good friends with Ali and blah, 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 blah. And it was, they made something up about how it was, I was part of a slander campaign, which you can't be part of a slander campaign when everything you're telling is the truth, because the very tenet of slander is that you're spreading lies about somebody. I've got government documents.
Oh, no. Here's the thing. I was told the only reason why you haven't been brought to court is because you're in Canada. That's why.
Right. That's what he said. That's what Ali told people. He also told people that when I come to the States, that Homeland Security is going to arrest me. Well, Homeland Security has nothing to do with him other than they paid him a visit after my stories came out to say, yeah, we're watching, because they used to be involved with him when he used to have to travel for the NYPD and the FBI. But when they cut that out and he was no longer allowed to travel, they are no longer involved with him. So I've actually got Homeland documents with his name and all of his information on it that I'll be putting in my next story, which is coming out 9/11, actually, my next story to coincide with his 9/11 related arrest. So, people can say it's as phony and fake as they want, but they will be surprised by what I'm going to be releasing in the next chapter.
Mike, let me ask you something. Why is factual evidence going to the wayside in journalism? I mean, it just seems like you said, everything has to do with money, and the facts of any kind of news story nowadays seem to be brushed under the rug. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. Well, the other thing is a lot of, even having dealt with a lot of mainstream news people over the years through my PR work I used to do, and now even with like the Tim story, I've dealt with a lot of reporters like in Edmonton and in national news. They just don't have the time. And to do an investigation like I do is time consuming. Like I was working while doing each of these like 2-year-long investigations. And you notice I'm putting like one story out a couple months or one story out, and that's when I have, because I'm an independent, I have to make sure that all of my facts check out. So, somebody claiming that the only reason I haven't been sued, which I think I know who it is who's been saying that, who I've got emails and texts saying otherwise behind the scenes.
You know who it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to say his name because then he'll just have a moment. Anyway,
a Maylocks
moment. That, yeah, he'll have a moment with himself in the bathroom probably. So if we if you look at all the juxt of all these problems, it's not that people maybe don't. This story also has the Islamic issue to it, right? Like this has that angle to it where people don't want to be looked at as Islamophobe. So I've been very careful. I've actually talked to ex-members of this group. I've talked to, I've got a lot of Muslim friends that I've talked to. I actually was hired as a result of, you talked about the MMA media not giving me any credence for my work. I was hired by an organization to compile a database on this group through all of the FBI and government documents that they've obtained and that I've obtained. So there's an actual database of this group that Ali was in that's documented. And like I said, I've spoken to people that were in the group that confirm most of the details. I've got NYPD and FBI sources. But the reason why a lot of people don't want to talk about it is there's that aspect of it as well. And, I'm very careful to make sure that I'll be honest, I'm an atheist. I have no dog in any fight as far as religion goes. I was a Catholic growing up, and I just am not a religion guy. So religion's fine to me, but when people do things under the guise of religion, to say that they're, religious people, and they're going out and planning murders and, like selling their 13-year-old daughter off to buy leadership in a group when they're Canadian citizens, that doesn't sit well with me. That's newsworthy stuff that I think needs to be brought out, because it's not really about the religions that they're trying to hide behind. I think, religions all have a place in society, but not when they're harming society.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like I'm with you there too. Like I'm not a big religious person by any stretch of the imagination. Born Jewish. I'm just, I guess I'm more of a believer of faith than religion. So whatever.
Yeah.
Circumstances.
And it's, that's the thing. People inject religion into everything, and they don't need to. And I don't get. You look at all social media, religion, politics, all that stuff. Great. If you're passionate about it, that's one thing. But I don't think, even in reporting, sometimes you start seeing this kind of thing creep into it. And I just don't think there's a place for it. Everybody's got an opinion on things. And, I think that's kind of what rubs people the wrong way about my reporting is that, sometimes I've been accused of being slanted or biased. But really, I've got all the evidence to back the assessments that I'm making. So,
and that's the other thing, Mike, because then people try to discredit you, like, oh, he was fired from this website. Oh, why hasn't he ever got picked up by another website?
Never been
this,
fired.
That, and the third.
Yeah.
Well, how it goes on
that's
social media. One knucklehead says you're fired, and all of a sudden it's the golden rule. There, it's the truth.
Well, that's the thing with trolls, right? People believe these trolls, and when these trolls start saying things. The reason why people say things like that is because they've got no other straws to grasp at. They can't say that my stuff is incorrect. They can, but I don't make FBI documents. And I don't make, all of the sources that I'm going to be quoting in my next story are all people that knew Ali during all of this time. So, I've got wives, girlfriends, ex-instructors. I've got probably at least a dozen different sources that I get for each story. So, to me, it used to bother me when people would make these claims about me, but, when I know the truth, you can't argue with facts. And that's the bottom line.
You have to have thick skin.
Yeah, so the other one was that people kept saying that, and I think you brought it up too, because I've heard different, iterations of it. Even I had some quotes on my website, like some comments people put in where, if this was so real or legitimate reporting, then more people would be reporting about it. Well, no. You obviously don't know how the MMA media works. It's like you tick off one person, and like you said, you may lose access to. Ali claims he has 100 guys now. So you really want to go, oh, okay, just because I'm going to, secretly a lot of these people that are saying that aren't reporting about my stuff are sending me messages to say, hey, I wish I could say something. I'm kind of in a tough position, whatever. Well, great. Don't go out of your way to kind of dismiss my work or to say that it's not real when, you've got that's more slanderous than it is saying that I'm creating these slanderous pieces. To me, is that you're criticizing my credentials and my work. And I take pride in my reputation. My reputation, 10 years, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in this sport who I've done wrong or double-crossed. I don't think there's one person that would come forward and say, oh, yeah, he screwed me over. If it is, it's because I've written about them and they're not happy about it.
It's one thing that I just think that in order for this to start moving forward, we need to do something about the media side of things as well.
Yeah, the MMAJ I don't think is going to do it, man. I just don't. I've had this discussion with members, with board, like with people that are on the board as officers, and I've had it with other journalists. And the problem is, if you've got some people that are in the group that shouldn't be in the group, well, that sets a bad example. If you've got, I tweeted about it today, I've been told that there's officers that some of these kids that are coming to me for advice are saying that they've messaged all of the different officers over the years and they've never once returned any of their messages. that doesn't send a good message. And, you see some of these people that are involved with the MMAJ who maybe aren't following all the rules that they've got listed right on their website. So to me, when there's nobody looking after, and it's volunteer too, the only real repercussion you could have, I think, is that you could be kicked out of the MMAJ, which is a good starting point. If you're kind of on the outskirts because of things that you've done that are against the rules, maybe that's a good thing. But not when there are other people that are being led away with, things that they've done that are equally as egregious. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I thought it was a good idea. It even says on my website from 2 years ago that I thought we needed an MMA Writers Association. But you know what? We talk behind the scenes. I've got a lot of other colleagues and friends that we talk to behind the scenes. Maybe we'll just start our own collective and not charge dues, and we'll just give advice that way. That's, probably the way that I think a lot of us are going.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough. Like, I'm definitely with you. I don't, I've said it publicly. I've said it privately. It's just, I think, in all fairness, the MMA JA is a good idea, but it just kind of seems more like that snooty group when you're in high school that you just never really wanted to be a part of. It's just what it seems like.
Well, I've always been on the outskirts of that. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, always.
I know what you mean. And it's one of those things where, everybody said it was a popularity club, and it was like kind of we're helping out. And people did say they thought it was, and I've had other journalists tell me this. They thought that the look of it and the optics of it was this group only really got involved when Ariel was getting screwed around by the UFC. And, it may not be the case. I'm hoping not. But I've had people, more than one reputable journalist with, that work for some of these places that some of the people on the board work for, and they've said that they don't think that it's, I don't know. We'll see what happens when the new officers are elected, but again, I don't know if that will change because, it's, again, a popularity contest. And I don't think that any of these people necessarily have union experience, and I don't know exactly how much that they're going to enforce and help other people with, they're busy people. You have to have somebody that has time to dedicate to doing something like this. And I don't see, like I said, I don't see like guys like Ariel and some of the other guys on the board answering DMs from all the members whenever they have a question about whether or not this is ethical or could they do this or should they do this. So if they're not going to be available and there's not going to be anybody to use as a reference, then what are you going to pay money into that for?
And that's the other thing is also you have to pay dues. Like how many people who are actually doing this as media members actually getting money out of what they do? It's very few. It's very few.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say less than probably 5 or 10% of us at the very most.
Yeah,
I'd say even less. I used to be paid full time, man. I can't get a paying job.
It's rough, man. It almost seems like as soon as the UFC did away with the sponsorships, that most of the money in MMA completely dried up.
Yeah.
Well, you have to wonder too. You have to wonder as time goes on. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago about how easily accessible all the fighters are, promoters. 20 years down the road, is everything going to be so accessible? I mean, we're going to have to scratch and claw to get a press pass. It's a very uncertain future.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's what WME is trying to do. They're trying to bring it more into the mainstream. But I'll bet you that all those little windows that we had that were open to fighters, back in the day when I first started, like in 2006, there wasn't Facebook and Twitter and all these different things you could use. You had MySpace and then hopefully a list of contacts that you could ask for more contacts. So I'd spend most days on the phone calling gyms and calling. It was exhausting. And now we've got, even the way that Google works way better now that you can go back and look for things. It's way easier, but that access only comes if you're going to get the access. And I could see, maybe WME pulling back the reins, especially. Remember back in the day, I don't know if you guys knew, but you'd ask the UFC for a request on a story, and it was a given that they wouldn't respond. You'd have to ask because it's part of, ethical journalism. But you'd send a response in, you wouldn't get a reply, you just write. We asked for a response once, twice, 3 times, but we didn't get a reply. So there was kind of an era where they were responding to things, but it was only certain things. So I can see WME, especially with how critical everybody's being since the changes that came in, since they've been in play.